Hello everyone, Reza here. Welcome to another Nuke video. In this video, we are going to explore how to transform, how to move, how to animate our artwork inside Nuke. Now we've already very briefly actually discussed this node in our rotor video. We all know now hopefully the node for that is called transform. So as you can see, there is no move button or rotate button or scale button within our user interface as you may expect, but instead we have that as a form of a node since everything is node based. So inside transform dropdown, the only one with the hotkey assigned is the transform node. The hotkey for it is letter T. So if I select my artwork and press T, I'm dropping this transform node, and now I can move this artwork. I can use my node undo button to bring it back to the position. I can rotate it, or I can scale it proportionately. Or if I want to just scale it in X or Y, I can click on that digit 2, and then I have individual access to X and Y. I can click on that 2 again, and it brings it back to X and Y locked, where you can just scale things proportionally. Now we have that jack or gizmo here where you can do the same thing using that icon. So click on the outer handle, allows you to rotate, undo. You can just select the actual sphere icon on the handle that allows you to proportionately scale this object up and down, or you can just move left mouse button and reposition the artwork or whatever element you have inside Nuke. Now I'm going to scale this down just a tad, and I'm gonna press middle mouse to fit my screen to this region. I have another artwork, and that is just a simple field. I can press M to merge, press Shift X to switch between A and B pipe, and just plug that transform to this element here. Now, as you can see, although I've got alpha channel, because of this white color chip, it really doesn't show everything, because as we discussed again, we need to use pre-mult node to not only refine the edges, but also create the proper transparency. So I'm just going to drop in a simple pre-mult, and then we get the alpha channel working for us the way that we want. Now I'm going to bring the viewer down, and let's see what we can do with this guy. So if I zoom in and pick the transform channel, I can actually move this object outside of this scene, and you can see as soon as I bring the object outside, we get that extended border. Now you got to be very careful about that, because I can actually move this here and we kind of extend the border to even more pixels, and believe it or not, this will get calculated, although it's outside our current framing. Because we're extending the border, it gets calculated. So sometimes you need to use other trickery to remove that extra level of calculation, especially if you think that you're about to add some expensive nodes such as blur or gain. These are the nodes that can add to the processing time or eventually slow down your scene. So I'm just going to move this here, and let's start with our first keyframe. I'm gonna, with the transform node selected, I'm actually gonna right click on translate and set a key. Before I do that, I need to be mindful of my timeline. We really need to know how many frames we're dealing with and what the frame indicator is showing us. So as you can see, this is the time slider, right? And I'm on frame 4. This means that if I set a key, I'm going to set a key on frame 4, not frame 1. Now, sometimes by accident, you use your scroller to do this, And you can see all of a sudden I'm zooming back on a time slider. If that happens to you, just single click middle mouse will fit the time range. Now what specifies the time range is your project settings. So if I go to the property bin and press S, you can see the frame range is set from 1 to 100, and that's what we have. You may say, well, Reza, I need only 20. Then in that case, instead of showing global, which is your project setting, you go to in and out. Now, how to specify in and out? It's that button. So you can specify a range for that, in and out. You can see I've specified 1 for my in and 20 for out, which I think it's not too bad. It's just around 1 second. We don't want to create a lengthy animation. We just want to see how to operate with keyframes. I'm going to bring my frame indicator to 1, switching back to transform, and probably scale up my artwork a little bit so it's not too small. That's good. I'm going to move it back again. Now I'm going to right click, and with the frame indicator set to 1, I'm going to go and set a key. As soon as I do that, you can see the channel turns blue, and I also get a blue color here. This is a one-off operation. This means that if you move forward and reposition the object and change the translate X value, it will get updated. It will create a keyframe for you. So basically you're switching to auto key after the first keyframe. Let's say you go to frame 10, you move the ball here, and you can see it shows you point A to point B, and then you go to frame 20 and you bounce it to probably, let's say here. And again, it shows you the path for your animation. And of course, every single keyframe you make, it actually, the indication for that is that blue frame on your time slider. That's great, but how can we have control over this keyframe? Let's look at the animation. This is what we get. So it's like it's not hitting the ground, it's sort of sliding and moving up, which is not what we call animation. Now, if you're coming from a non-animation background, then you may find this challenging, but if you're an animator or if you're familiar with similar workflows inside Blender, Max, or Maya, you immediately know that we need more than just a time slider. We need to have access to the keyframes. Now, the good news is it's all provided. So if you go into Node Graph pane, we have one called Curve Editor. So what you're seeing here is frames versus values. So the horizontal indicators are frames and the vertical ones are values. Now we've got the actual transform node. Within that transform node, we only keyframed translate channel. But when we move this ball to X and Y, we keyframed both channels. And that's why we have that curve, hence the curve editor. So if I press F, I can actually frame my region and see from frame 1 to frame 20, we had 3 keyframes. Same goes with Y. So if I press F, it actually is going to frame everything for us. How to navigate? You can do everything with the middle mouse. Hold middle mouse, you can pan, and scrolling the middle mouse, you can zoom in and zoom back. Now, sometimes you have keyframe, but you cannot see anything in the curve editor, and that can catch you off guard. So if you clean your property bin, your curve editor will get empty. And this is something that you need to be mindful of. If you want to see all the changes, then you need to double click on the node, the transform node, and bring the properties inside your property bin, and only then it can be viewed by curve editor. Now let's explore things that we can do inside Curve Editor. Obviously, we have first frame, second frame, and last frame. And right after that, we see constant value. Constant value is a value with no change. It's like this animation is dead, no fluctuation. Same as before frame 1. So it is a no-brainer that we're not going to have any animation outside this frame range. Now, by the way, by marquee selecting, I'm selecting all 3. Now, let's say I want to change the way that these keyframes behave to slightly polish my animation. Let's say I'm kind of happy with my first frame and last frame, but the impact is the one that I'm not happy about. It's really, really odd. It's sliding up. Now, to interpolate parts of a curve, you need to right-click on that keyframe. So if I right-click on the keyframe, we have a menu called interpolation, and that is very, very powerful. Now, the first one, and I'm not going to go through every single one of them, I'm just going to explain some highlights. Constant will make everything dead from the keyframe that you selected to the next keyframe. So if I go constant, you can see everything will go to a constant value and jumps to the next frame on that frame, which is maybe useful at some point, but generally when you're animating something and halfway through you change something to, or a keyframe to constant, chances are you run into some odd results. Then you have a linear interpolation where you put in place sharp changes at keyframes and kind of create straight lines between them. And this can be useful. So for mechanical movements, if you, let's say, have a robot, you can select this guy, right click on it and say linear. As you can see, everything is going to be super sharp and rigid, no easing out, very mechanical. So, you know, might be something that you want. Definitely not going to be what we want in this example. The next one is smooth, which is sort of the default. So if you have a smooth, it's very similar to what you get if you create your animation from the start. So Nuke has a tendency to give every keyframe smooth interpolation by default. Then we get to some rarely used ones like Catmull Rum or Cubic, and these guys change the constant value to linear value. So basically, if you're changing y-axis, that interpolation mode is going to add values to whatever axis you're changing. This one, for this example, I'm changing, let's say, y from this value in frame 0 to this value in frame 10 to this value in frame 20. If I right click on it and say, well, change it to Catmull Rum, after frame 20 is no longer constant. It's now linear. So it's actually going to shoot up the ball to infinity in y-axis right after the frame. It's very similar to after linear, which does the exact same thing. So you can use one or another. Now you can see very quickly that none of these guys are going to give us exactly what we want, because in order to really tweak the tangents and to interpolate them, we need to break those tangents. The way that you do it is by selecting them, you right click on it and you go break. Now I can left mouse click and actually move the interpolation however I want. And the funny thing is, as soon as I change the curve here, you can see the curve changes here too, which I found quite intuitive and fun. So we do the same thing here as well. Now if I go and rewind and play, you kind of feel the impact now. And that's how you fix the tangents and the interpolation mode, by tweaking them frame by frame until you get the result that you want. Now the cool thing about transform is you can actually apply motion blur to it. And we've got motion blur and shutter. Motion blur is the amount of samples. So if I set it to 1, I'm actually enabling motion blur. You barely use over 1. Usually for most scenarios, 1 should suffice. You can actually refine it and get really, really cool, smooth results, but it will slow down your scene. And shutter is how much shutter speed you need. Of course, you lower it, you get less blurred effect. You increase it, you get super blurry effect. And if you increase the shutter, chances are you need to increase motion blur as well. So I can actually go to town on this one, and it's a bit of an overkill, definitely, but you can actually enable motion blur and get results. If you want to get rid of this curve, by the way, you can always either collapse the property bin or temporarily, if I bring it back, temporarily remove it and then get rid of it. So yeah, you can do that, and that's cool. So that's a quick look at how Transform Node works. There's one more thing I would like to mention, actually two. One is Dope Sheet. So Dope Sheet and Curve Editor are quite similar. In order to bring your information into Dope Sheet and Curve Editor, you have to have them open in the property bin. So I'm going to double click, bring it into the property bin. Now I have it open in Curve Editor and Dope Sheet. Dope Sheet is very similar to Curve Editor, but it only shows frames, not values. So you can see I have access to frames. I can actually select, move them around, and you can select as many as you want. You select, you move it around. Very, very easy to use, much easier to use compared to Curve Editor. If I right click, you have access to all of these guys, right? Now with Curve Editor, I can actually reposition them as well. You can left mouse and reposition them, and it only changes the value. You can see it doesn't allow me to change the frames. You may say, well, you change the value even in Curve Editor and you change the frame number in Dope Sheet. Yes and no, because you actually can change the frame number in Curve Editor too. You just need to hold down Control. So if you hold down Control, you can actually have that happen in frame 15 or frame 20, 21, whatever you feel like. So holding Control allows you to free move or free form your keyframe. Now, that was the first thing. The second thing is, some of you may ask, well, Reza, you talked about the power of nodes, the input, the output, and the mask pipe. We don't see any mask here. And you're absolutely right. We don't have any pipe for mask in Transform. That's why if I go to Move or Transform drop down, we have TransformMasked. And that guy is identical to Transform, right? So this node is very similar to Transform and let you to translate, rotate, scale, or skew an image in 2D in the same way as the Transform node, but it also offers control for assigning a mask to protect certain areas. So you can actually assign a roto node, plug it to a mask, and then translate that. Now, one question that I get a lot is, can we copy the animation from one node to another? And the answer is yes. So if I move these guys down, plug this one here, and I'm going to open both of them and go to frame 1. I can actually disable this transfer for now. And let's say I want to transfer the information, the translate information from this node to this node. All I need to do is to hold down Shift, click on this curve, and drag and drop. Done. I'm going to collapse both rollouts so I don't see these gizmos and curves. And if I play, now I see the animation coming from the new TransformMasked node. The only thing that I don't have right now is the motion blur. So I can kind of enable the motion blur that way and set the shutter offset to centered and get the exact same look. Now, I didn't really spend the time to do squash and stretch. I'll leave those to you. It's not really an animation, principles of animation course, but it basically allows you to understand the workflow and all the tools you need to animate 2D images in a 2D canvas inside Nuke. All right, that was a really quick overview on how to animate or how to approach animation using Transform. And in the next video, we're going to talk about keying techniques. So that one is going to be quite exciting. So stay tuned and talk to you guys very soon.